All right, we are live. Welcome, everybody. This is the new diffs weekly, and let's go straight to the agenda. Yeah, I wanted to take the opportunity to ask for a status update on the investigations of caching that we've talked previously, that we were going to do. Stas, do you want to read it?
Yeah, I have nothing to speak about the caching stuff today. Maybe next time.
Okay. Is that on your plate alone, or do we have Igor or Patrick helping out in some way?
I think it's just me, but if I have any troubles with backend stuff, yeah, I will ask for help.
Okay, let's try to get an update for next week at least, even if it's just again nothing. But I want to check in on that. That's one of the open questions we have so far, and as we're trying to finalize documentation, we kind of like wanted to know more or less how that will play out. Cool. So I wanted to make a note here. I aim to so there's a merge docs. Sorry, there's a docs revision merge request uh, open to make the tweaks that we've talked about previously of all the sections of the blueprints. I aim to do it this week to have that merged. And I think I already created a section there, like as to do as a follow up to create a sort of a diagram of sorts about the data flows. Because we, as a blueprint, I think it'll be interesting, it'll be necessary actually for somebody coming out of the context of new diff to fully understand what we're trying to accomplish here, to have sort of like a summary diagram of overseeing things, even if at sort of at a high level. I don't think we need like the specific properties that will come in the requests or anything like that, but just have more or less the idea of we're going to get, for example, from Gitly, we're going to get the list of changes, sorry, list of paths, list of changes, change paths, and we're going to ask in chunks the changes for each change paths and stuff. That kind of stuff I think would be useful to have documented in a diagram. Then all the way to, all right, do we persist this diff? Then go to the database, caching, how the caching plays out, all the way down to the browser, potentially even client-side cache if you already have an idea on it. But I think it would be very interesting and necessary to have that as part of the blueprint. Any objections to that? Okay, before I go on to the next part. So yeah, I've been talking a lot about this with Thomas in one-on-ones and also here on the meetings. So I feel like he's the obvious one to like just delegate this task to create like this diagram. And he's definitely going to be needing some help on the backend side to support him in that sense. And again, it will be up for review for everybody to take a look at so that we can tweak it to a good shape. But yeah, the ask here was to see if anybody wanted to take the backend side. And I'll just leave it open. Anybody wants to take the backend side here? I know that there's not a lot of backends except Justin, but you're in Gitly.
Yeah, I can at least help with maybe the Giddily portion of it, and I can work with some of the other folks.
Okay. Thomas, do you have any questions on the assignment or delegation? Anything, is that clear to you? What do we want?
Yeah. There are going to be some pieces that are
Unknown.
yeah, unknown, because
That's fine.
we've talked about chunks of this, but right now it's either going to be here's what we do currently, and maybe that's not the right approach, or here's a dream. But yeah,
Well, I think that's a really good point actually. So we don't want to think about a diagram and a flow that is completely not rooted in reality that we have right now, because we are going to need to have some sort of like upgrade path from where we are to where we want to be. Of course, I don't expect us to keep on using the internal endpoints that we're using to interact between the server and the front end. I think those will go. We'll have to drop them. But I think it's important to document, for example, these change paths that we're just talking about on Gitly side. That's already a documented change that's happening on the Gitly side. So those kinds of things, I think it's important to have some veracity to it, I guess. But we want to make sure that it is feasible. So we don't want to go like pie in the sky, like super like idealistic thing. feasible plan that we are going to discuss. And again, if you find something that is unknown, that's the reason why we're doing the diagram, so that we can like focus on that particular part of the diagram, bring everybody's attention to it, clarify that, and then document it. But that's the ask, is to document what we have been talking about here, and maybe we can have a separate conversation on this with Stanislav and Patrick and Igor if we need to. But I'm putting on you to lead that, because we need to have that quickly. And again, there's a new milestone coming along, so I could talk to your manager and try to find capacity from your side. But essentially, this is something that I think will really embellish the blueprint. Natalia, I don't know if other blueprints, they all have diagrams like that, but I think I've seen a couple where it was very useful for me to understand them. So what's your take there?
Not all of them have diagrams, but it definitely helps with understanding what's going on.
Okay, so I think it's definitely worth our time. Thanks. All right, so I'll leave it to you, and happy to support in any way you need. And if you have any questions, we can still talk about it and clarify. Cool. All right, that's it. Stanislav, you have the next one.
I wanted to raise a question regarding composition API in our code base. We have never used it at GitLab, and there are good reasons for that, because it gives you a lot more flexibility in how you can do stuff. And usually that comes with the downside that everyone tries to invent their own pattern, how to do stuff. That's why we are quite hesitant to allow it as for now. But it seemed to me like composition API is a good fit for our specific case for the new diffs, because we have so many ways to manage state. I've listed all the ways in the agenda. You can see we have UX, we have Apollo, we have state machines, we have ES classes, we have event bus, we have U2 observables. And all of these are trying to achieve basically the same thing, to make this thing reactive in some sort of, and connect it to a component. And basically composition API does exactly that. And it also can be used outside of Vue. We don't have to use Vue components to apply composition API. So that was my kind of idea to consider maybe using this. I don't think we'll decide it right now, but just to give you a thought, maybe think a little bit about this and share your questions or opinions about it.
It's definitely an interesting proposition. The one thing I would say at the moment is that it's not very clear to me yet how much code we'll reuse. Of course, the edges, like the markdown editor, yes, we'll definitely reuse that. Some of the bits that we already have built, they'll definitely be reused. But I expect a whole chunk of, like, for example, the Vuex state management that we do in the diffs app today to be replaced. Not all of them, but a big chunk of that to be replaced with the new code that we're going to write for this project. But that doesn't defeat the proposal here. So I just wanted to add that context. Just because we have that today doesn't mean that the new app will reuse all of that from the get-go. So there's definitely even like the mechanisms to leave comments on, like the multi-lines and all that stuff. Like, we're definitely going to need to do some refactoring and rewriting, maybe even of features there. That's why the documentation of the features that you're working on, Stanislav, is very important for us to ensure feature parity on the new diffs viewer, I guess. But yeah, don't get too hung up about what we have today. But knowing that we still have to support a big chunk of it, yes, I think that this could be something that we can consider. It's out of my league to weigh in whether it's a good idea or not, but any others have ideas? Natalia, looking at you.
May I add one comment about what you said? I agree that we should get rid of UX. No one likes to write mutations, then add actions to call these mutations. Yeah, we're kind of past that. But the question is, what do we place Vuex with? We have Apollo State, which also has its downsides. It's not an easy API, and not everyone is comfortable with writing in Apollo State. Also, I don't think we have a lot of cases using Apollo outside of Vue components, which is also could be a problem for us. And composition is kind of the best of the both worlds. It is imperative on the one side, and also it hides lots of the complexity for activity stuff. So we don't actually have to rewrite everything from scratch to use composition API. We can actually hook into our existing approaches. For example, we can reuse our state machine, we can reuse our ES classes just with the simple wrappers, and then gradually migrate to using composition API at its fullest. That's one of the benefits of using it, that we can gradually rewrite using composition API.
Thanks, Stas. Natalia, had anything to share?
Not a lot, but when I'm a bit hesitant on allowing composition API for wider usage at GitLab, for all the reasons Stanislav already phrased, I think that new diffs is a very special case. And when we say that we don't plan to reuse the code, I would say that you will need at some point, because for writing everything right now, it's very much not feasible. It's a lot of the code. And creating composition API kind of a wrapper for all the logic inside of it is a good idea, because then you can refactor the implementation of the composition functions and leave the interface of the composables to be the same. I would only probably ask that if you go this way, that we could involve a few people to review the composables, mostly from those who are involved highly in Vue 3 migration group, so that we can make sure that we establish some kind of standards, because if you choose to use composition API, it will be the pilot project for GitLab, and it's better to establish some standards early.
Sure. I was writing what you were saying, but yeah, we'll definitely involve other people in this case to review the composables.
I also wanted to add, Natalia also mentioned this to me privately, that we can actually reuse some of the stuff that we will be adding to new diffs. Like we have discussions, we have, I don't know, code quality. This stuff can be reused in other places just because of the nature of composables. They are like components, but without the rendering part. So it will be easier for us to share logic between the nodes app and the diffs app.
So I think what I'm struggling now to understand is, where does this fit with your previously, like, things we discussed about having those layers of having the components, the plugins, whatever you want to call them, and then the components? Where does it all fit? So maybe we can if I can ask you to update that proposal, I guess, issue with this for us to take a understanding. I think my major concern is, like, I don't want to make a decision blind to the effects of this decision, if you know what I mean. Essentially, I want to make sure that we're not making ourselves vulnerable to like displaying things quicker. Then now we're going to have to wait for internal mechanisms of Vue or some reason, or just have to load more libraries. So for me, it's pretty unclear where this comes into play. So it'd be useful to have some clarity there, but we don't have to do it on this call. Just definitely, I think updating that issue would be the best way to see how it all fits with the whole thing, if that makes sense.
I'll just briefly mention that it doesn't actually affect the architecture I proposed with 3 layers of separation of concerns. For the composition API specifically, you would create composables that will be used in plugins. So basically, a plugin will create an instance of a composable, and then it passes it down to a component or to some other function. So in that regard, the free layer architecture actually gives us a lot of freedom how we use these composables. We can actually mix and match composables and other ways to manage state as a temporary step, just because we don't want to rewrite everything from scratch, and eventually migrate to using composition API everywhere.
Okay, that's definitely interesting to hear. I think we're also going to need to have another call to continue on the front end definitions and all the stuff that we've talked about, but that's a separate topic, I guess. I think this will be, from what I'm hearing, it definitely sounds like a good, useful tool, but yeah, keen to hear more about it. So that begs the question, which is what I'm alluding to. At a certain point, you want to have this part of the app documented in the blueprint, at least roughly speaking. Should we schedule another front-end exclusive meeting about this so that we can like pick up the discussion where we left off and try to get to a position where we can just like commit to the documentation? Maybe next week.
That sounds good to me.
Okay, I'll make sure to invite you to that one, Natalia. We forgot to include her on the first one. Okay, cool. Thanks for bringing this up, Stas. Definitely keen on simplifying things and making us a little bit more future-proof. Anything else? Other thoughts on this one? Okay. Any other topics besides this one? I do want to register that the target we had on our backs, or not our backs, the target we had was to have the blueprint published by 31st of January. That day has passed. We are now in February in a new fiscal year, but I think we're making good progress in removing some unknowns there. So I think we're gonna keep on going a little longer until we're ready to finally call it a final revision of the blueprint. So it's gonna take a little longer, but I urge everybody to kind of push this forward to get this to where it needs to be. I had another question, but I need Patrick on the call, so I'll bring this up asynchronously, essentially about his decision to drop the highlighter, the three-seater highlighter for the benefit instead of and use the current one we have. I wanted to have a little bit more insight into that, but I think I need Patrick for that, so I'll bring it up in asynchronously, and then we can potentially discuss it next week. That's it. Apart from that, I don't have anything else. Cool. Anybody has any other points? Then, if not, thanks for your time, everybody. Have a great week.